I heard the rip before I saw it, loud, tearing, unmistakable. It echoed across the calm lake like a gunshot, slicing through the peaceful silence of my weekend escape. I had been sipping coffee on my porch, watching the mist rise from the water, when the sound jolted me upright. My eyes darted toward my lake tent, the same one I'd carefully set up the night before for a quiet day of fishing and solitude. What I saw turned my stomach. Two strangers, grown adults, yanking at the fabric of my tent like it was a toy, laughing as they ripped it down piece by piece. I bolted toward them, heart racing. "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my voice cutting through the morning air. One of them didn't even turn around. The other just glanced over his shoulder with a smirk and said, "Karen said this junk wasn't allowed here." Then they both walked away like nothing had happened, leaving the crumpled mess of my tent in the dirt. I stood there for a moment, stunned. The tent wasn't just some temporary setup, it was custom-built for my weekend getaways, something I used every summer. It wasn't on shared land. It wasn't in a gray zone. It was on my property, land I had purchased 5 years ago, well outside of the HOA's jurisdiction. That's what made this so outrageous. These guys acted like they had every right to vandalize my stuff, just because some nosy neighbor gave them permission. And I didn't have to guess who that neighbor was. It had to be Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of the neighborhood HOA, even though she technically wasn't supposed to have any authority on my side of the lake. But that never stopped her from trying. Karen was infamous around here. If your lawn grew a centimeter too long, she'd snap photos and post them in the community Facebook group. If your dog barked past 8 p.m., she'd threaten to call animal control. And if she spotted anything near the lake that didn't fit her aesthetic standards, she'd report it to anyone who would listen. The woman treated the HOA like her personal army and acted like she was mayor of a town no one voted for. This wasn't the first time Karen had crossed the line. A couple years back, she tried to tell me that I needed HOA approval to repaint my cabin, even though it was on land clearly outside the community's managed zone. I showed her the survey documents proving my property wasn't under their governance. She stormed off, furious. Since then, there had been subtle little attempts to pressure me, parking violations left on my windshield, garbage complaints about my bins, and now, this. The worst part was, I didn't recognize the men who tore down my tent. That meant Karen had either invited guests or hired someone to do her dirty work. Either way, they had no idea what boundaries they were crossing. And what made it sting even more was how proud they looked while doing it, like they thought they were doing the neighborhood a favor. Like I was some nuisance to be removed. I picked up the pieces of my tent slowly, inspecting the damage. Poles were bent, the canvas was torn, and my fishing gear, carefully organized beneath the shelter, was scattered across the ground. My cooler was missing, and the camping chair I kept folded nearby was broken in two like someone had stomped on it. My peaceful morning had turned into a crime scene, and I was furious. But I also knew something Karen didn't. You see, a couple weeks earlier, I'd started noticing some petty vandalism around my lake lot. Things moved, bait spilled, even cigarette butts left in places I never sat. I figured maybe some kids were sneaking around, so I installed a trail cam. It was discreet, mounted high in a pine tree, angled just right to see the tent area. I didn't expect much from it, just wanted peace of mind. But now, that little camera was going to be my ace in the hole. Before doing anything else, I went back to my cabin and checked the footage using the linked app on my phone. It loaded fast. And there they were, clear as day. Two men, mid-30s maybe, stumbling through my lot with beers in hand, laughing like frat boys on a prank run. One of them pointed at the tent, said something like, "Karen said tear it down," and the other replied, "You sure? This looks expensive." The first guy shrugged. "She said it's not allowed. She said the guy's been ignoring the HOA. This is part of the community now." Then they started pulling. It was all there, their faces, their voices, their destruction. Every second captured in 1080p. I took a screenshot, saved the video to my gallery, and backed it up to the cloud. I knew I'd need it soon, especially because I had no doubt Karen would try to twist the story. She always did. And sure enough, not even an hour later, I saw her outside, walking her dog along the road near my lot. She waved, smug, like she knew something I didn't. I walked down to the edge of the property and called out to her. "Karen," I said, trying to stay calm, "did you tell two men to come onto my land and tear down my tent?" She didn't even flinch. "I told guests that there's been unauthorized structures near the lake. They were helping enforce the HOA rules." "Karen," I said, pulling up the survey app on my phone, "you know this land isn't under your HOA. You've seen this map." She scoffed. "That's debatable. The HOA board discussed this area, and we agreed it's part of the shared shoreline. You can't just do whatever you want here." That's when it hit me. She truly believed, or was pretending to believe, that this was now her jurisdiction. That she could decide what was allowed and what wasn't, based on an imaginary vote no one told me about. She smiled wider. "I think you'll find the HOA rules apply to everyone now." I gritted my teeth. Even if that were true, which it isn't, how does that justify destroying my personal property? You had no permit. No approval. You brought this on yourself. Then she walked away. Just like that. And as she disappeared down the path, I looked at my phone again, at the paused frame of those two men wrecking my setup under Karen's orders, and I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the scene over and over in my head, my tent crumpled like trash, my gear scattered, and Karen's smug expression when she claimed the HOA had magically extended its reach to include my land. The nerve of her acting like my property was a community picnic area. But I wasn't going to let it slide. I had the footage, and I knew exactly what to do with it. The next morning, I made some calls. First, to the sheriff's office. I explained everything: 2 trespassers, property damage, and the kicker, video evidence that captured the whole thing from start to finish. They agreed to send an officer out to take a statement and review the footage. While I waited, I gathered the remains of my gear and took photos of the damage. Broken poles, ripped canvas, crushed cooler. I even found one of their beer cans tucked under a bush, still half full, which I set aside in case fingerprints became relevant. Every little bit would help build a clear picture of what happened. A few hours later, a patrol car pulled up, and out stepped Deputy Larson, a calm, no-nonsense type I'd seen around town before. I shook his hand, showed him the damage, and then we went inside so I could show him the video. He stood over my shoulder, arms crossed, watching closely as the 2 men tore down my setup while casually chatting about Karen's orders. At one point, one of them actually looked straight into the lens and laughed. Deputy Larson raised an eyebrow. "Well," he said slowly, "that's about as clear as it gets." He asked for a copy, which I gave him on a USB drive, and he wrote up an incident report right there at my kitchen table. I asked what would happen next, and he said they'd need to talk to Karen and the 2 men involved. Charges could include trespassing, vandalism, and destruction of private property. That was music to my ears. For once, Karen wasn't going to slither her way out of this one with her fake authority and fake rules. But it got even crazier from there. That afternoon, while I was sweeping up debris from the campsite, I heard a commotion from the road above. 2 more sheriff's vehicles pulled up, this time with Karen standing beside them, arms folded, lips pursed so tightly they nearly disappeared. She pointed in my direction, talking fast, and the officers looked unimpressed. I stayed where I was. Moments later, 2 deputies walked down toward me, and one of them said, "Sir, we've had a complaint filed against you by Ms. Karen Jeffries. She's claiming you erected an illegal structure on HOA land and verbally harassed her guests." I almost laughed. Are you serious? That land isn't even part of the HOA. I've got documentation, and more importantly, I've got the video. The same deputy, who must have already been briefed, nodded. We've seen the footage. We're just here to gather statements on both sides. Karen, however, wasn't backing down. She marched toward us, waving her phone around like it was a warrant. You can't just put up structures wherever you feel like it, she snapped. This entire shoreline falls under HOA recreational zoning. We had a vote. A vote doesn't change property lines, I said, trying to stay calm. This is my land, Karen. I have the deed and the survey maps to prove it. You've known that for years. You've refused to integrate your lot into the community, she hissed. It's disruptive. You mean I refuse to be bullied into paying HOA dues for land that isn't part of your community, I replied. There's a difference. That really set her off. Her face turned red, and she shouted, You're the one causing problems here. You think just because you're off the grid, you can do whatever you want? This isn't a lawless zone. The deputy stepped between us, hands up. Ma'am, please lower your voice. We're handling this professionally. Karen huffed and stormed back toward her house. The deputies followed to get her official statement, but I could already tell they weren't buying her act. When they returned later, they told me they'd identified the two men in the video as her nephew and his friend, both of whom had been staying with her for the weekend. According to the report, she admitted to telling them that something needed to be done about the tent but denied giving explicit orders to destroy it. So she gave a green light without actually saying the words, I said. Exactly, the deputy replied. Still makes her liable. And since it's your private property and we have visual evidence, we're treating this as a criminal matter. A part of me wanted to celebrate right then and there, but I held back. I knew Karen well enough to expect one more move, something sneaky, something loud, something desperate. And she didn't disappoint. That evening, I got a notification on my phone. Someone had posted in the community's Facebook group. The post? A long-winded rant from Karen titled, Community Safety Breach at the Lake. In it, she claimed I'd built an unauthorized structure that posed a danger to children, alleged that her guests were merely protecting the neighborhood, and accused me of threatening her. It was absurd, and the comments were mixed. Some blindly supported her, while others started asking hard questions. One neighbor even replied, But isn't that part of his private land? I remember seeing his property line map a few years ago. I didn't reply directly, but I did post a link to the footage, hosted privately and shared with select neighbors. Word spread quickly, and within hours, people began turning against her. One by one, the comments shifted. That's not what she made it sound like. He didn't threaten anyone. They destroyed his stuff. Karen, you need to stop. The tide was turning, and fast. She'd always used social pressure to maintain her control, whispers, meetings, public shame, but now the light of day was burning her carefully crafted lies to ashes. I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I was defending the right to not be part of her imaginary kingdom. Later that night, I sat on my deck watching the sun sink behind the lake, the sky glowing gold and crimson. The wreckage of my tent was gone, cleared away, but I was already making plans to rebuild, better, stronger, and more secure. And this time, I knew the HOA had no legs to stand on. Karen had poked the wrong bear, and thanks to one trail cam and a whole lot of nerve, the truth was now impossible for her to hide. The next morning, I woke up early, not because I had to but because my mind wouldn't let me rest. The storm Karen stirred up wasn't over yet. Even with the police report, the video evidence, and the neighborhood chatter turning against her, I had a gut feeling she wasn't going to let this go. That's how she operated. Karen didn't lose quietly. She'd always seen herself as the puppet master of the neighborhood, pulling strings, issuing rules, bending the facts to fit her narrative. But now, her usual tactics had backfired. The entire situation was shifting in a way she hadn't anticipated, and for the first time, I had the upper hand. But I wasn't going to gloat. Not yet. Instead, I focused on getting everything in order. I emailed the footage to my lawyer, sent a written statement to the sheriff's department for their records, and backed up all files in 3 different cloud drives. I wasn't about to let any piece of this evidence slip away. After all, I wasn't just dealing with vandals. I was dealing with Karen. Around noon, I got a knock on the door. It was Deputy Larson again. This time, he had an official notice in hand. He explained that the county was taking the matter seriously. Since I had documented damage and verified property ownership, they were preparing charges against the 2 men involved. But there was more. Karen herself was under investigation, not criminally yet, but the sheriff's office had flagged her for encouraging actions that led to a criminal offense. The deputy asked me to be prepared to testify if it escalated into a civil or even criminal court case. I agreed. I was more than ready. After he left, I took a walk down to the lake, trying to clear my head. The air was still, the surface of the water calm, reflecting the pines and sky like glass. But in the silence, I couldn't help but replay Karen's words, "This entire shoreline falls under HOA recreational zoning." That was nonsense, of course, but it bothered me. Not because it was true. It wasn't, but because she actually believed it could be enforced if she just repeated it loud enough. That's what people like her relied on: confusion, intimidation, bluster. The kind of arrogance that made them think if they acted confident enough, everyone else would back down. Well, not this time. That evening, I received a message from a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in a while, Mark, who owned a property 2 lots down from mine. He told me he'd been following the whole mess on the Facebook group and was glad I stood up to Karen. Then he dropped a bombshell. Apparently, Karen had tried the same thing with him last year. She told his family they couldn't build a fire pit near the lake because it violated HOA shoreline policy, even though his land, like mine, was outside of HOA boundaries. He didn't push back at the time because he didn't want trouble. But after seeing how she treated me, he regretted not taking a stand. That really struck me. If Karen had pulled this same stunt before and gotten away with it, no wonder she felt so untouchable. I realized I might not just be fighting for myself, I was also standing up for every neighbor she'd intimidated, manipulated, or silenced. The next day, I sent an email to the county's zoning office, requesting a formal statement confirming the property lines and clarifying the HOA boundary. I figured if Karen wanted to challenge me legally, or try her favorite trick of misrepresenting the rules, I'd shut her down with facts she couldn't ignore. A few days later, I received a stamped letter from the county. It clearly stated that my land was privately owned, that it fell outside any HOA jurisdiction, and that no shared community easements applied to it. It was exactly what I needed. I scanned the letter and attached it to my original Facebook post, along with a polite but firm message: "For those still confused about what happened, here's official confirmation from the county. This is not HOA land. The actions taken against me were not only unlawful, they were completely baseless." That post exploded. Dozens of neighbors liked and shared it. Even some of Karen's old supporters began to distance themselves. One brave soul commented, "Karen, I think it's time to stop speaking for the rest of us." That's when she finally responded. A short, cold reply: "My intentions were only to protect community interests. I'll be stepping back from the HOA board effective immediately." Boom. Just like that, the self-crowned queen of the neighborhood abdicated her throne. But I wasn't done yet. I decided to take the high road, but not the silent one. I uploaded the full story, along with the video footage, to YouTube. I titled it, "HOA Karen Called the Cops After Her Guests Ripped Down My Lake Tent," then I showed the proof. Within 48 hours, it had thousands of views. People couldn't believe the arrogance, the entitlement, the audacity. The comments poured in. Why do HOA Karens think they're above the law? You handled this like a champ. That footage is gold. I wasn't looking for internet fame, but the story hit a nerve. Everyone has dealt with someone like Karen. And seeing justice served, on camera, was satisfying in a way words couldn't express. Of course, Karen tried to do damage control. She sent out a long email to the neighborhood calling the video misleading and selectively edited, even though it was raw footage from a security cam. She even hinted at legal action, but that fizzled quickly when my lawyer replied with a preemptive cease and desist. At that point, her grip on the neighborhood had completely slipped. No more anonymous complaints. No more surprise inspections. No more fake rules printed on letterhead she probably made herself. People started reclaiming their space, building fire pits, painting fences, setting up tents by the lake again. Karen's rulebook had been torn in half, just like my tent. And in the middle of it all, I rebuilt. Not just the tent, but the entire camp setup. I got a new tent, reinforced poles, waterproof canvas, better gear, and even solar lights around the area. I upgraded everything. And this time, I placed visible signs marking the private boundary line, signs approved and verified by the county itself. I even added another camera, higher resolution, motion activated with a cloud sync. Because I wasn't taking chances anymore. I wasn't going to live in fear of petty power plays. This was my land, my peace, and no HOA fantasy was going to change that. A week passed, and life started to feel normal again, at least on the surface. My lakefront was back in order, my gear replaced, my trail cams in place, and the HOA quiet for the first time in what felt like years. Karen had retreated into the background, her resignation from the HOA board posted without ceremony. But I wasn't naive. I knew people like her didn't give up easily. Still, the neighborhood had changed. The silence that used to come with fear had turned into something else, relief. Neighbors who had avoided conflict before now smiled and waved when they passed by. Some even stopped by to thank me. Mark, the guy who told me Karen once threatened him over a fire pit, dropped off a six-pack and said, "You didn't just win one for you, man. You won it for all of us." It felt good, not because I needed the praise, but because it reminded me why I fought so hard in the first place. This was about more than a tent. It was about principle, ownership, and not letting someone rewrite the rules just because they spoke loudly and carried a clipboard. The YouTube video had taken on a life of its own. It crossed 100,000 views by the second week. Comments poured in from people across the country. I had a Karen in my neighborhood too. We need more people like you who won't back down. This is exactly why I refuse to live under an HOA. Strangers shared their stories, some funny, some infuriating. One guy said his HOA fined him for having too many sunflower pots. Another shared how their HOA president tried to ban porch swings. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just my battle, it was a glimpse into a widespread problem. These mini-authorities popping up in communities, making life miserable for people who just wanted peace and privacy. But perhaps the most unexpected part of it all was the impact the footage had on the sheriff's department. Deputy Larson called me a few days after the video went viral. He thanked me for handling the situation calmly and told me that the county had decided to look more closely into how some HOAs were operating. Apparently, mine wasn't the only one crossing the line. Some had been enforcing rules where they had no legal power, citing documents that weren't even valid. The county was now reviewing bylaws and property lines to ensure homeowners like me weren't being tricked or pressured into compliance. I didn't expect to become the face of HOA resistance, but if my situation helped others, it was worth it. Karen, on the other hand, went dark, at least in public. She deleted her social media, stopped attending community events, and for weeks, didn't leave her house unless absolutely necessary. No more morning strolls with her dog. No more surprise visits to check if someone's lawn was exactly 2 inches high. Her silence was almost eerie, like a storm that had passed but left behind wreckage she didn't want to acknowledge. A few people said she was furious, blaming everyone but herself, convinced she'd been betrayed by the very people she once lorded over. But no one was listening anymore. Her power wasn't stripped away, it evaporated. And she had no one to blame but herself. I decided not to pursue further legal action. The 2 men who destroyed my tent were fined and ordered to pay for the damage. They also sent a written apology, clearly written by someone else, but I didn't care. I had no interest in dragging this through courts or stretching it into some drawn-out grudge match. I got what mattered most: accountability, truth, and my peace back. And Karen? She got exposed. Not just to the neighborhood, but to anyone with an internet connection. To celebrate the quiet victory, I invited a few neighbors over for a lakeside cookout. We grilled burgers, shared drinks, and laughed under the stars. It was the kind of simple joy that Karen had spent years trying to control. No rules, no restrictions, just good people enjoying the land they owned and respected. Someone even joked, "Should we make you the new HOA president?" Everyone burst into laughter. "Only if I get to tear up the rulebook," I replied. We all knew the HOA wasn't going away entirely, but at least now, people knew they had the right to question it. They had proof that they didn't have to bend to every ridiculous demand or bogus citation. As the night wore on and people started heading home, I stayed back and looked out over the water. The reflection of the moon shimmered across the surface, calm and still. The new tent stood strong at the edge of the shore, better than before. I smiled, not just because I'd won, but because I hadn't let them break me. Karen and her guests had come in like bullies, confident no one would challenge them. But I did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't retaliate with fists or threats. I used something better: proof. Truth. And the quiet determination to stand up for what was mine. There's something deeply satisfying about watching a lie collapse under the weight of undeniable evidence. It doesn't happen enough in life. Too often, people like Karen get away with things because no one wants the hassle of a fight. But sometimes, standing your ground is the only choice you have. I'm not saying everyone should strap cameras to their trees or post videos online. But I am saying this: don't let someone intimidate you out of your own home, your rights, your land. Because if you give them an inch, people like Karen will take everything. Weeks later, a for sale sign went up in front of Karen's house. Rumor was she was moving to another city, to be closer to family, but we all knew the truth. She couldn't walk down the street without feeling the weight of her own actions. She couldn't stand the sideways glances, the cold shoulders, the polite silence that replaced what used to be fearful compliance. She had burned every bridge in the neighborhood, and when her kingdom crumbled, there was no one left to defend her. As for me, I keep things simple. I fish. I read. I enjoy the breeze off the lake and the sound of birds in the morning. And every time I look at that tent, I remember the storm it survived. Not just wind and weather, but pride, arrogance, and entitlement. It's more than fabric and poles now. It's a symbol. A reminder. That no matter how loud someone yells, how many rules they wave in your face, or how entitled they feel, they can't take what doesn't belong to them. And they definitely can't silence the truth.